Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to Buckeye Politics. It's me, your favorite Ohioan. So today we're going to be looking at some pretty critical news with the 2024 presidential election. This just came out yesterday, and we might have our first sort of maybe mini announcement. There's Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina and the former UN ambassador under former President Donald Trump administration, has teased a White House bid while she was slamming Joe Biden on Iran. She said yesterday at a Christians United for Israel. She condemned Biden for being weak with Iran and predicted that any nuclear deal with the current administration would guarantee that Iran gets a nuclear weapon. And then she dropped a bomb of her own, and she said that no deal is a bad deal. And if this president signs any sort of deal, I'll make you a promise. The next president will shred it on her first day in office, Haley said, prompting applause from the audience. Just saying sometimes it takes a woman. So she said the same thing on Twitter, which sent shockwaves around the political atmosphere because there's been a lot of rumors that Nikki Haley may be considering running for president, but it's all kind of been in speculation. But this is the first big step, and if this is kind of like the first, major, announcement for 2024 for the Republican Party. And it is interesting to see if the Nikki Haley is teasing a White House bid this early on, especially around speculation that Donald Trump may also be running. And DeSantis, if you look at the polls, she would get absolutely crushed by Trump. All the polling for the 2024 Republican primary showed Trump at around the 50 to 60% among Republican voters, while Nikki Haley's at like 5%. DeSantis is at like 20%. So if Nikki Haley were to run against Donald Trump, she would get absolutely destroyed. But if Trump were not to run, then she would actually be in a relatively competitive race. So it's just interesting to see really what happens. It's far too early to tell. But this here definitely tells me that she's definitely considering a run. So that I thought would be interesting if we did a quick prediction between Nikki Haley and Joe Biden for the 2024 presidential election. So we're going to start by filling in the safe states for Nikki Haley, which include all the states you would expect in the Great Plains as well as the Deep South, because she is from the South. She would have a lot of Southern appeal. She'd probably win South Carolina by a safe margin, as well as the great state of Alaska. Meanwhile, I think Joe Biden's safe states would include the entire Pacific Northwest and California. Haley has some appeal to suburbanites in that part of the country, but really not that much. She's not like that great of a candidate for that part of the country, although she might do a little bit better than people expect. I think Haley also wins the state of Illinois by a safe margin, as well as the entire Eastern Shoreboard and Northeast, as well as the state of New York. Haley might do a little bit better in like Connecticut or Massachusetts, but those states are already so Democratic leaning that it wouldn't matter. She also wins Maine's first district and Maine at large by a safe margin. I think Joe Biden wins those places by a safe margin. He has a lot of appeal there, and Haley just not a good candidate for that part of the country, and there was already solidly Democratic areas, as well as the state of Hawaii. So these are the safe states for Joe Biden and Nikki Haley. Let's start by filling in the likely states. And for Nikki Haley, she only has one. That is the great state of Texas. Texas is a solidly Republican state. It's very formally, I should say. It's beginning to trend to the left a little bit. But Nikki Haley is a pretty solid candidate for the state. She would be able to do well in the suburbs and also maintain some of that Trumpian base in the rural parts of the state. The Hispanic areas would be interesting to see what they would do there. That would really depend on how Nikki Haley ran her campaign. If she ran as more of a neocon, like saying, "Oh, immigration good," then she might actually lose ground there. But if she ran as at least semi-anti-immigration, I think she would still do decently in the Rio Grande with Hispanics. I think that she would not do as well as Trump, but she would still do decently. So Texas, I think, would go to her by a likely margin. She'd probably do about as well as Trump did, maybe a little bit better, just because the economy is so horrible, especially if she goes up against Joe Biden. Now, Joe Biden only has three likely states, and those are the states of Colorado, New Mexico, and Virginia. Virginia and Colorado are both very suburban states. I think Nikki Haley would do pretty well there. They both went to Bush in the 2000s, and they like more neoconservative, more moderate Republican types. I think Nikki Haley would do well there. She would not win them, but she would make them relative. She would make it interesting. It'd be a lot closer than people expect, but I think it would still go to Biden by like 6-7 points or so. New Mexico was also barely just above 10. I think Nikki Haley would do a little bit better in the suburbs of like Albuquerque and Santa Fe, but she wouldn't do that great. Hispanic trends would probably continue a little bit, so she'd probably just barely get it under 10. So that would constitute a likely R state. Likely D. So the lean states for each side include states of Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, Florida, as well as Arizona for Nikki Haley, and So let's start with Iowa and Ohio. So Iowa and Ohio are both formerly swing states. Iowa was more of a Democratic-leaning state. Actually, Ohio was a swing state. But Donald Trump's very anti-immigration and protectionism when it comes to trade, and his support for tariffs and bringing back manufacturing really appeal to a lot of voters in that area, because that area, Ohio and Iowa, have been very badly affected by NAFTA, free trade agreements. They've lost a lot of jobs, and immigrants coming across the border have taken some of their jobs as well. So they were very receptive to Trump's message. And Nikki Haley, I don't think she would be all that protectionist. She'd probably support free trade, which would really hurt her in that part of the country. But that said, I still think the states have moved enough to the right, and Joe Biden, the economy is still awful enough under Biden that Nikki Haley would manage to win there. North Carolina is the only state Nikki Haley may do a little bit better in. She is from South Carolina, which is a neighboring state. Her politics are very much appeal to the average Southern voter in that part of the country, and I think she would actually do very well in North Carolina. Instead of Florida, Florida has moved to the right quite a bit, but it's more because of Trump and his policies. I think a generic Republican would probably underperform Trump a little bit, but still win it. But with the economy just being so bad, and with Nikki Haley doing a pretty good job of portraying herself as this like anti-communist. I mean, Biden's not a communist by any stretch of the imagination, but if Trump's messaging about Biden being a communist worked in Miami, then Nikki Haley's should as well. And I think that she'll probably win Florida by a lean margin. State of Arizona. Arizona voted for Joe Biden very narrowly, but for the longest time, it was a solidly Republican-leaning state. Nikki Haley is just a good fit for the state. I think she'd win it. She'd win it by about 2-3 points or so, because Arizona is still a relatively Republican-leaning state. Just there was a solid block of Republicans who didn't like Trump, but Nikki Haley would get those voters back on her side. And with the Biden being underwater across the country, I see no reason she doesn't win Arizona. Now that brings us to the lean states for Joe Biden, which includes states of Nevada, not tilt lean, Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire. Nevada, pretty self-explanatory. Nikki Haley would not do as well with Hispanics as Trump did. She might do a little bit better. Nevada might tighten up a little bit. Maybe instead of Trump winning it by like 2, no, Biden wins it by like 1. But still, it's going to be in the lean column. I just don't see Nikki Haley having all that much appeal in that part of the country. Instead of Minnesota, it's like I said, it's Nikki Haley being being more supportive of free trade and more supportive of immigration. I don't think that would bode well for her up there. She might do a little bit better in the Minneapolis suburbs, but those places are already far too gone for it to really make a difference. They already vote so heavily Democrat that I don't think the gain she might make would make up for that. Instead of Michigan and Pennsylvania, both are very similar to Iowa and Ohio. They're very unionized, very traditionally Democratic states that voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and are remaining competitive because the Republican Party has moved more to a more protectionist, more America First, more pro-worker party on certain issues, and they like that. So that's the only reason those states are competitive. Nikki Haley has not been all that receptive to things like free trade, protectionism, and being anti-immigration. I think that would really hurt her. Yeah, the economy would suck under Biden. It does, but I just don't think that Nikki Haley has enough appeal to your average Rust Belt Union type voter that, unlike Trump, where she can do well up there, and I think she would lose both those states by a lean margin. That brings us to the last lean state, which I forgot to color state in, and that is Maine 2nd Congressional District. Maine 2nd District, it voted for Barack Obama twice. It voted for Donald Trump twice, and it's a very populist, very working class area. And I think that Nikki Haley would do nowhere near as well as Trump did. Obviously, you'd say for the same reason she's doing poorly in the Rust Belt. But I think she would. But I think she would still win it very narrowly. Biden is too socially liberal. That part of the state's very socially conservative. And I also forgot to color in Nebraska 2nd Congressional District, which is kind of the opposite. It's a very suburban, very anti-populist district. But I think Joe Biden very narrowly wins there. It voted for Biden by like 6 points in 2020, and while Nikki Haley definitely does a lot better, I don't think she wins it. I don't think she has enough appeal, and I think Biden would just barely eke out like a 1-point win there. That brings us to the two final states, which are Wisconsin and Georgia. These would be the two most competitive states. And as you can see, this race is still very much up for grabs. Now we're going to start for Nikki Haley, and I think she would win Georgia by a tilt margin, but I do think Joe Biden would win Wisconsin by a tilt margin and narrowly win the re-election. Now, starting in the state of Wisconsin, Wisconsin is a state that has moved more Republican than Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota, but I still think I'd vote for Joe Biden for the same reasons that the other states did. I mean, Nikki Haley, she's not a protectionist. She believes in free trade, which, as we talked about a few videos ago, completely hollowed out the Midwest. It's not a very good economic policy for things like for manufacturing and blue-collar jobs, which is a huge thing up there. She would maybe do a little better in the WOW counties, the Milwaukee suburbs, but I think she would get destroyed in the rural areas. I mean, Obama won Wisconsin handily, and Wisconsin for the longest time was a very solidly Democratic-leaning state. It was really only Trump that came in with his economic populism, and the Democrats going a little too far left on social issues. Wisconsin went Republican. But Nikki Haley, she's more moderate on social issues, so there would be no incentive for the blue-collar types to vote for her. Unlike at least Trump was relatively socially conservative and portrayed himself as such. But Nikki Haley is a moderate on social issues, and she's very globalist. She supports free trade. She supports immigration and amnesty. She wants us to be involved in the Middle East, and it's not going to bode well for your blue-collar worker who just wants to in a union who's a traditional Democratic voter bloc. Biden does not have that appeal up there either, but he has more than Nikki Haley does. At least Biden has a Democrat in front of his name, has a D in front of his name, and he was formerly relatively populist. And sure, the economy would suck, and I think the state would be very competitive, but I think Joe Biden would win it just because Nikki Haley has no Rust Belt appeal, at least on policy. Georgia, however, I think would also be very competitive, but I do think Nikki Haley wins it. She is from South Carolina. She has a lot more appeal in the South. I think Georgia, if Nikki Haley was like from the North, I don't think she would win it. But Nikki Haley, she has a lot. She would have very high name recognition in Georgia, especially going up against the incumbent. And with the economy being pretty bad, and I think Nikki Haley being from that part of the country would just energize some turnout. I think she would very narrowly win the state of Georgia, although it would be very close. So that, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. And as you can see here, the Republican Party, I mean, Joe Biden's very beatable, even with a candidate like Nikki Haley. The race is still competitive, but Joe Biden is not guaranteed to lose. We still have to nominate a good candidate, and we still have to nominate someone who is good on policy. So that, thank you for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed. And if you did, please like and subscribe for more.